My grandmother made us all promise something at her deathbed. I was the only one who kept it. 3 years later, a lawyer found me. She'd gathered us in her hospital room that last afternoon, her hands paper-thin against the white sheets. "Promise me," she'd whispered. "Promise you'll visit your grandfather's grave every month. Tell him stories. Keep him company." We all nodded. Mom squeezed her hand. My uncle dabbed his eyes. My brother murmured yes. I was 19, and I meant it. The first month after the funeral, I drove to Oakwood Cemetery alone. Everyone else had excuses. Mom was too emotional. Uncle had work. My brother claimed car trouble. I sat by the headstone and talked about grandmother's rose bushes, how they'd already started drooping without her care. The next month, I went again. And the next. It became routine. I'd bring coffee, sit on the grass, and tell grandfather about my college classes, my failed relationships, the way the neighborhood was changing. Sometimes I'd read him articles I thought he'd find interesting. Sometimes I just sat in silence. 3 years passed. My visits never stopped, even when I moved 2 hours away for a job, even during blizzards, even when I had the flu and probably shouldn't have been driving. Every single month I showed up. Meanwhile, my family's promises evaporated like morning fog. Mom remarried and got too busy with her new life. Uncle moved to Arizona. My brother barely remembered grandmother's name anymore. At family gatherings, no one mentioned the cemetery. No one asked if I still went. They'd simply forgotten. Then last Tuesday, a woman in a gray suit appeared at my apartment door. She handed me a thick envelope. "I'm Patricia Montgomery, executor of your grandmother's estate. There's been a development." Inside was a letter in grandmother's shaky handwriting. She'd known. Somehow she'd known that everyone would break their promise except me. She'd hired Patricia years ago with specific instructions. If anyone visited the grave every month for 3 years straight, they'd receive what grandmother called her real inheritance. Patricia pulled out a second envelope, sealed with red wax. "Your grandmother left detailed records. Cemetery logs, surveillance footage she'd arranged. You're the only one who qualified." The envelope contained a key and an address in Vermont. There's a property, a farmhouse on 40 acres. It was your grandfather's family land, kept secret from everyone. Your grandmother inherited it when he died but never told your family. She was waiting to see who truly honored their word. My phone started buzzing. Mom, Uncle, my brother, all calling simultaneously. Patricia's smile was grim. "I sent them letters this morning informing them the inheritance has been distributed. They're probably just now realizing there was far more than they thought." I stared at the key. 40 acres. A house. All because I'd kept a simple promise everyone else forgot within weeks. Patricia handed me one final envelope. "This is for you to open at the property. Your grandmother left specific instructions." She stood to leave, then paused. "She told me once that she wished more people understood the difference between promising and keeping promises. She said most people think words are enough, but you proved otherwise." After Patricia left, I sat holding the key while my phone continued its desperate symphony. 3 years of conversations with a headstone, 3 years of coffee, and stories, and showing up when no one else did. The address gleamed on the paper. A farmhouse waiting in Vermont, 40 acres of secrets, and whatever grandmother had left in that final letter. I looked at my phone still lighting up with incoming calls, then back at the key. Tomorrow I'd drive to Vermont. Tonight I'd let them wonder. But honestly, after 3 years of keeping this promise, I needed to know what grandmother had planned all along. I let the calls go to voicemail. 38 missed calls by midnight. Text messages flooding in with increasingly desperate tones. Mom wrote that she'd visited the grave plenty of times, just not on the same days as me. Uncle claimed he'd sent money for flowers every month. My brother insisted he'd driven by the cemetery multiple times even if he hadn't gotten out of the car. The lies piled up faster than I could read them. Around 2 in the morning, Mom showed up at my door. Her makeup was smeared and she looked like she'd been crying for hours. "Please," she said. "This isn't fair." I loved her too. We all did. She was my mother. I let her inside because turning her away felt cruel, even though she'd turned away from her own promise 3 years ago. She sat on my couch, wringing her hands. "Your grandmother was testing us," she said. "That's manipulative. That's controlling. She shouldn't have played games with inheritance." I made tea and listened. "Did you visit the grave?" I asked her directly. "Even once after the funeral?" She looked away. I couldn't. It hurt too much to go there. Every time I thought about it, I just broke down. I nodded. "So you broke your promise because it was hard." She flinched. "That's not fair. You don't understand how painful it was for me." But I did understand. It had been painful for me too. Every single month for 3 years, sitting by that headstone had reopened the wound of losing grandmother. The difference was I'd shown up anyway. Mom left an hour later, still insisting the whole thing was unfair and manipulative. I went to bed but couldn't sleep. The next morning, I called in sick to work and started driving north. The address led to a small town called Willowbrook, nestled in the Green Mountains. 6 hours of highway and winding country roads brought me to a gravel driveway marked by a weathered mailbox. The numbers matched. I pulled in slowly, my hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly. The farmhouse appeared through a line of maple trees. It was beautiful. 2 stories with white clapboard siding, a wraparound porch, and green shutters that needed a fresh coat of paint. The property stretched beyond what I could see, fields of wild grass rolling toward distant tree lines. I parked and just sat there for a moment. This was mine, all of it, because I'd kept coffee dates with a dead man for 3 years. I walked up the porch steps. The wood creaked under my feet, The key slid into the lock like it had been waiting for me. Inside, the house was fully furnished. Dust covered everything, but underneath was a life paused in time. Grandfather's reading glasses sat on an end table next to a book marked with a leather bookmark. Grandmother's knitting basket rested beside a rocking chair. Photos lined the mantel, pictures I'd never seen. Grandfather as a young man, standing in these same fields. Grandmother laughing on this porch. My mom as a little girl, no older than 6 or 7, playing in the yard. This had been their place, their secret. I found the letter on the kitchen table, propped against a mason jar full of dried flowers. My name written across the envelope in grandmother's careful script. I sat down and opened it with trembling hands. The letter was 8 pages long, front and back. She'd written it 2 years before she died, when she'd first been diagnosed with the cancer that would eventually kill her. My dearest Evelyn, it began. If you're reading this, then you kept your promise. I knew you would. From the time you were small, you were different from the others. You showed up. You followed through. You understood that love isn't just words, it's action repeated over time even when no one's watching. Your mother, she started strong but never finished anything. My son, your uncle, he made grand gestures but disappeared when the work got hard. Your brother, bless him, he means well, but his memory is like a sieve. But you were always the one who stayed. When you were 8, you promised to water my garden while I was in the hospital. Every single day for 2 weeks, you showed up with your little watering can. Your mother forgot after 3 days. When you were 12, you volunteered to help me sort through my attic. It took 6 weekends. You came every single Saturday, even when your friends invited you to movies and parties. The others helped for one afternoon and called it good enough. When you were 16, I asked all of you to call me once a week after your grandfather died. I was so lonely in that big house. You called every Sunday at 3 p.m. for 2 years. Your mother called maybe once a month. Your uncle stopped after 6 weeks. Your brother never started. I'm not telling you this to make you feel superior. I'm telling you so you understand why I did what I did. This property has been in your grandfather's family for 4 generations. When he died, it became mine. I could have left it to all of you equally. I could have divided it up and let you fight over who gets what. But I didn't want this place torn apart by people who make promises they don't keep. I wanted it to go to someone who understands that integrity isn't convenient. It's doing what you said you'd do, especially when it's hard, especially when no one's looking, especially when everyone else has given up. The next 6 pages detailed the property's history, the maintenance that needed doing, the bank accounts she'd set up in my name, and the investments she'd made to ensure I had money for taxes and upkeep. There was more money than I'd imagined. Not millions, but enough to live comfortably if I was careful. Enough to quit my job and figure out what I actually wanted to do with my life. Enough to know I'd never have to worry about keeping a roof over my head. The final page was shorter. Your family will be angry. They'll call me manipulative. They'll say I played favorites. They'll claim you manipulated me somehow. Let them talk. You know the truth. For 3 years, you showed up at your grandfather's grave and talked to him like he was still listening. You did that because you promised, not because you expected a reward. That's who you are. This property is yours because you earned it through consistency, not because I loved you more. I loved you all the same. But love doesn't mean pretending everyone deserves the same things when they don't put in the same effort. Use this place well. Make it yours. And maybe, if you're ever lucky enough to have children, teach them what you already know. That promises mean something. That showing up matters. That the person you are when no one's watching is the person you actually are. All my love, your grandmother. I sat at that kitchen table and cried. Not sad tears. Something else. Relief, maybe. Validation. 3 years of monthly cemetery visits. Of talking to a headstone while people drove by and probably thought I was crazy. 3 years of my family forgetting. Of being the only one who remembered. All of it had meant something. Not just the inheritance. Though that was overwhelming enough. But knowing that grandmother had seen me. Really seen me. Had recognized something in me that even I didn't always recognize in myself. I spent the rest of that day exploring the property. The barn needed work but was structurally sound. The fields were overgrown but beautiful. There was a small greenhouse behind the house, glass panes dusty but intact. A workshop filled with grandfather's tools. A root cellar stocked with empty shelves waiting to be filled. This wasn't just a house. It was a life waiting to be lived. That evening, I sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. My phone had been buzzing all day, but I'd left it in the car. I needed this time alone, needed to feel what this place was before anyone else's opinions could cloud it. I drove back home the next day to start the process of moving my life north. Gave notice at my job, my apartment, started packing. My family called it ridiculous. Mom showed up crying again, begging me not to do this to her, as if my moving was something I was doing to her instead of for myself. Uncle called it ungrateful, said I should share the property, sell it, and split the money. My brother said I was being selfish, that grandmother wouldn't have wanted this. But she did. She'd planned it meticulously. She'd paid Patricia for 3 years to monitor that cemetery, to verify my visits, to make sure the conditions were met. She'd set up trusts and accounts and left instructions that were legally airtight. Patricia had assured me there was no contest possible. The will was clear. The conditions were met. The property was mine. 2 weeks later, I moved to Vermont with everything I owned stuffed into a rental truck. My best friend helped me drive up, stayed the weekend helping me unpack. She walked through the farmhouse with wide eyes. "This is insane," she kept saying. This is like something from a movie. I know, I told her. I still can't quite believe it's real. But it was real. The deed was in my name. The keys were in my pocket. The land stretched around me in every direction. That first month was overwhelming. The house needed so much work. Leaky faucets and creaky floors, windows that stuck, a furnace that wheezed and groaned. I spent my days learning to be a homeowner, watching YouTube videos about plumbing and electrical work, calling local handymen when things were beyond my skill level. The money grandmother left helped, but I tried to do as much myself as possible. I wanted to earn this place twice over. The town itself was small, population 3,200 according to the sign at the edge of town. One main street with a diner, a hardware store, a post office, and a general store that sold everything from groceries to fishing gear. People noticed newcomers immediately. Within a week, everyone knew who I was. The girl who inherited the old Thornton place. Some were friendly, others were curious. A few were cold, probably friends with my uncle who'd been spreading stories about how I'd stolen his inheritance. I didn't care. I kept to myself mostly, focusing on the property. I started visiting grandfather's grave in the Willowbrook Cemetery. It felt right to continue the tradition, even though the conditions had been met. I'd drive 20 minutes every month to sit by his headstone and update him on the property. The barn roof got fixed. The greenhouse is coming along. Your workshop is my favorite room in the house. I miss you. I miss her. Thank you for this. One afternoon while I was there, an elderly woman approached me. She'd been tending a nearby grave. You're the granddaughter, she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. She smiled. Your grandmother was a dear friend of mine. She told me about her plan years ago. She was worried no one would pass her test. I'm glad someone did. We talked for an hour. Her name was Dorothy. She'd known my grandparents for 40 years, since they'd first bought the property. Your grandfather loved that land, she said. Spent every weekend working it. Your grandmother would pack picnics and they'd spend entire days just walking the property line, planning gardens and future projects. When he died, she couldn't bear to sell it, but couldn't stand to live there alone. So she kept it frozen in time, waiting. Waiting for what? I asked. For someone worthy, Dorothy said simply. Someone who'd love it the way they did. Dorothy became my first real friend in Willowbrook. She'd stop by the farmhouse once a week, always bringing something. Fresh bread, tomato seedlings, advice on dealing with the local power company. She introduced me to her extended family, her grandchildren, her book club. Slowly, I built connections. The hardware store owner started greeting me by name. The diner waitress knew my regular order. The postal worker saved packages for me without needing to check ID. I was becoming part of the community in a way I never had been in the city. 6 months in, Mom made the drive up to see the property for herself. She'd refused to acknowledge it existed until then, I think hoping I'd give up and come back home. She pulled up in her new husband's BMW wearing designer clothes too nice for farmhouse visits. Her face when she saw the place. I'll never forget it. Shock, envy, regret, all at once. This was Mother's inheritance, she said quietly. This was supposed to be mine someday. I showed her through the house. She touched things gently like they might disappear. The photos on the mantle, the quilt on the rocking chair, her childhood bedroom upstairs still painted the same pale blue. She sat on the bed and cried. I grew up here, she whispered. Every summer. I learned to ride a bike on that driveway. I learned to bake in that kitchen. This was my favorite place in the world. Then why didn't you visit the grave? I asked. She looked at me with red eyes. Because every time I thought about doing it, I remembered this place. Remembered that it existed and I didn't know where. Mother never told me. Never mentioned she still owned it. After Dad died, I assumed she'd sold it. Finding out she kept it secret all these years. That she was testing us. It felt like a betrayal. I understood then what I hadn't before. This wasn't just about broken promises. It was about grandmother's quiet disappointment with her own daughter. About standards that were never met, and expectations that fell short year after year after year. About a woman who'd watched her family drift into mediocrity and decided to save one piece of her legacy for someone who'd care for it properly. Mom left before dinner. I love you, she said at the door, but I can't come back here. It hurts too much. I watched her drive away and felt sad. Sad for her. Sad for what could have been if she'd just kept her promise. Sad that her pride wouldn't let her accept that some things have to be earned. My first winter in Vermont was brutal. The farmhouse was drafty and the heating system struggled. I spent a small fortune on firewood and learned to appreciate long underwear and wool socks. The snow was beautiful but isolating. Days would pass without seeing another person. I'd bundle up and walk the property line, following the old stone walls that marked the boundaries. The land looked different under snow. Peaceful. Stark. Mine. I started planning what I'd do. Come spring. A vegetable garden in the south field where the sun hit best. Berry bushes along the tree line. Chickens maybe, if I could manage it. Grandmother's letter had mentioned that grandfather always wanted honeybees. I could learn beekeeping. The possibilities felt endless and overwhelming. Dorothy checked on me constantly that winter, calling every few days to make sure I hadn't frozen or run out of food. She taught me to can vegetables, to make jam, to prepare for seasons in a way I'd never needed to in the city. She told me stories about my grandparents, how they'd host huge parties every summer, how grandfather had built the porch swing himself, how grandmother had won a blue ribbon at the county fair for her strawberry preserves. You're giving this place life again, Dorothy said one afternoon while we were making soup in my kitchen. It's been dead too long. By the time spring arrived, I'd settled into a rhythm. The isolation that had felt oppressive in winter became peaceful. I'd wake with the sun, spend my days working the land, fall asleep exhausted and satisfied. I planted the garden, built raised beds, started composting, bought 6 chickens who became my constant companions, following me around the yard like feathered dogs. I named them after my favorite authors. Beatrix was the bossy one. Virginia was skittish. Maya was the best layer. In May, my brother showed up unannounced. He'd driven up from Boston with his girlfriend. They wanted to see what all the fuss was about. He walked the property with his hands in his pockets, not quite meeting my eyes. "This is really nice," he said finally. "I get why grandmother wanted to preserve it." We sat on the porch drinking lemonade. His girlfriend gushed about how peaceful everything was, how she could never imagine living so far from the city. My brother was quieter. "I should have visited the grave," he said eventually. "I meant to. I just always forgot. Life got busy and it kept slipping my mind. I know you probably think I'm a terrible person." "I don't think you're terrible," I said. "I think you make promises you don't keep. That's not the same thing." He winced but nodded. "Fair enough." Before he left, he hugged me, longer than usual. "I'm glad it's you who got this place," he said quietly. "You'll actually take care of it. Mom would have sold it. Uncle would have developed it. Me, I would have let it fall apart through neglect. But you'll make it something." He was right. I would. I was. Summer brought tourists and locals to the farmer's market in town. On a whim, I rented a small booth and brought vegetables from my garden. They sold out in an hour. The next week, I brought twice as much plus fresh eggs. Same result. By August, I was a regular vendor, known for organic produce and the story behind the farm. People loved hearing about grandmother's test, about the promise and the inheritance. Some thought it was romantic. Others thought it was harsh. Everyone had opinions. I didn't care. I had the land, and that was enough. One of my regular customers was a man named Felix who ran a restaurant in the next town over. He bought everything I'd sell him. "These tomatoes are incredible," he'd say. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." We started talking beyond just transactions. He'd been a chef in Manhattan for 15 years before burning out and moving north for a quieter life. "I get it," he said. "The need to work with your hands, to create something real." We started having coffee after the market closed, then dinner. Then he was spending weekends at the farm, helping me repair the barn and arguing good-naturedly about the best way to train tomato plants. By fall, we were together. Not in any official way, but in the way that matters. He'd stay over most nights. We'd cook together in grandmother's kitchen. He taught me techniques he'd learned in professional kitchens. I taught him about soil composition and companion planting. It felt natural, easy, like the house had been waiting for this too. One night while we were sitting on the porch, he said, "Your grandmother would have liked this. Seeing the place lived in, seeing you happy." "How do you know I'm happy?" I teased. He gestured at everything. The farm thriving, the garden producing, you covered in dirt and smiling. "This is what happy looks like." He wasn't wrong. I was happy. For the first time in my adult life, I was exactly where I wanted to be, doing exactly what I wanted to do. The inheritance had given me that, but also the years of keeping a simple promise, of showing up even when it was hard. That had built something in me. Discipline, integrity, whatever you wanted to call it. The ability to do what I said I'd do. Uncle finally visited in October, just before the first snow. He came alone, drove a rented car, wore clothes too fancy for farm visits. He walked the property in silence while I continued working in the garden. After an hour, he found me and sat on an overturned bucket. "I was wrong," he said. "I called you selfish, said you'd manipulated mother." I was angry, and I lashed out. "I'm sorry." I accepted the apology because holding grudges seemed exhausting, but I didn't offer to share the property or make him feel better about missing out. He'd had the same chance I did. He'd chosen not to take it. We talked about other things, his job, his kids, the weather. Before he left, he asked if he could visit again sometime, bring his family, show his kids where their great-grandmother grew up. "Of course," I said. "You're always welcome here." And I meant it. The property was mine, but the memories belonged to all of us. The second winter was easier. I knew what to expect. Had prepared better. The farmhouse stayed warmer. The chickens had a proper coop. I'd canned enough vegetables to last months. Felix moved in officially in January, bringing his restaurant skills and his terrible jokes. We settled into a comfortable rhythm. He'd work evening shifts at the restaurant while I managed the farm during the day. We'd overlap in the mornings and late nights, cooking elaborate meals and planning next season's crops. One night he proposed. Not with a ring or anything formal, just lying in bed talking about the future. "I want to do this forever," he said. "Work this land with you, build something that lasts." I said yes because it felt right, because he'd proven over months that he understood what this place meant, that he'd show up and do the work even when it was hard, that he kept his promises. We got married in the spring in the south field where I'd planted the garden. Dorothy officiated. My brother came with his girlfriend. A few friends from town. Felix's parents drove up from New Jersey. Mom didn't come. She'd sent a card with a check inside and a note saying she couldn't watch me celebrate in the house that should have been hers. It stung, but I understood. Some wounds don't heal just because time passes. My aunt showed up, though, Mom's younger sister who I barely knew. She pulled me aside during the reception. "Your mother calls me every week crying about this place," she said. "But she's wrong to blame you. She had the same chance. She just didn't take it." Aunt Helen stayed the weekend, helping us plant a small orchard along the western edge of the property. Apple trees and pear trees that wouldn't produce for years, but would outlive us all if cared for properly. "This is what legacy looks like," she said while we worked. "Not money or houses, but trees and traditions and promises kept." 3 years after Patricia first knocked on my apartment door, I was standing in the same cemetery where I'd spent so many afternoons talking to grandfather's headstone. But this time, grandmother had a stone next to his. I'd had it placed there with money from the farm. Simple granite with her name and dates and one line underneath. She kept her promises. I sat between them like I used to, like I still did once a month. I told them about the farm, about Felix, about the garden producing better every year, about the farmer's market and the regular customers, about the chickens who'd become local celebrities, about the life I was building on the foundation they'd left me. "Thank you," I said, "for seeing me, for trusting me, for teaching me that showing up matters." A car pulled up behind mine. I turned, expecting Dorothy or maybe Felix. Instead, Mom stepped out. She looked older, tired. She walked over slowly and stood a few feet away, not quite approaching. "I visit sometimes now," she said quietly. "Not as often as you did, not even close. But sometimes." I nodded. There was nothing to say to that. She'd started keeping a promise years too late. That counted for something even if it didn't change anything. "Can I sit?" she asked. I moved over and she settled on the grass beside me. We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "I should have kept my promise. All those years ago. I should have just done what I said I'd do." "I know," I said. She wiped her eyes. I was so angry at Mother for testing us. But she was right to. We needed to be tested. I failed. You didn't. I reached over and took her hand. She squeezed back. We stayed there until the sun started setting. 3 generations connected by promises kept and broken, by inheritance earned and lost, by the simple act of showing up even when it's hard. That night, back at the farmhouse, Felix and I sat on the porch, watching stars emerge. The property stretched around us in darkness, 40 acres of land that had become home. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. I considered the question. "About promises," I said. "About how the small ones matter as much as the big ones. About showing up." He nodded like he understood. Then he said something that stayed with me. "Your grandmother didn't give you this place because you visited a grave. She gave it to you because you're the kind of person who visits graves. There's a difference." He was right. The inheritance wasn't a reward for services rendered. It was recognition of character. Grandmother had seen something in me that I was still learning to see in myself. The ability to follow through, to be consistent, to do what I said I'd do even when no one was checking. That's worth more than 40 acres or a farmhouse or any amount of money. It's worth everything. 4 years in and the farm was thriving. We'd expanded the garden, added the honeybees grandfather had always wanted, started selling at 3 different farmers markets, built a small farm stand at the end of the driveway that operated on the honor system. People left money in a coffee can and took vegetables. It shouldn't have worked, but it did. Most people were honest. The occasional theft seemed like a small price to pay for believing in human goodness. We hired help during harvest season, local teenagers who needed summer work. I taught them what Dorothy had taught me: how to tell when tomatoes were ready, how to harvest without damaging plants, how to can and preserve. But mostly I taught them about showing up, about doing the work even when you don't feel like it, about keeping commitments. Some of them got it, others didn't. That was okay. Grandmother's test had sorted us years ago. I'd passed. That was enough. Dorothy died in the spring of my 5th year on the property. She was 86 and went peacefully in her sleep. Her family asked if they could hold the reception at the farmhouse. Of course, I said. She loved this place. We filled the house and spilled onto the lawn. 3 generations of Dorothy's family, plus half the town. People told stories about her kindness, her terrible sense of direction, her legendary pot roast. I told them how she'd befriended me when I knew no one, how she'd taught me to survive Vermont winters, how she'd known my grandparents and kept their memory alive for me. At the end of the reception, Dorothy's oldest daughter pulled me aside. "Mom told me your grandmother's story," she said, "about the promise and the test. I think that's what she saw in you, the same thing your grandmother saw. Someone who understood that love is action over time." We buried Dorothy next to her husband in Willowbrook Cemetery. I started visiting her grave too, once a month like clockwork. I'd sit and tell her about the farm, about Felix, about the life she'd helped me build. She didn't answer, but I could feel her approval anyway. Some promises extend beyond death. Some commitments last forever. By year 6, we'd established enough of a rhythm that I started thinking about expansion. Not of the farm itself, but of its purpose. The farmhouse was too big for just 2 people. The land produced more than we could sell. I started researching agricultural education programs, community-supported agriculture models, ways to give back. Felix supported it immediately. "You're thinking about your grandmother's letter," he said. "The part about teaching the next generation." I was. Grandmother had recognized something in me and invested in it. Now I had the means to do the same for others. We started small, hosting workshops on the property, organic gardening, chicken keeping, food preservation. People came from all over the county. Some drove hours. The workshops grew into a regular program, then into internships. We'd host college students for summer sessions, teaching them sustainable farming practices, room and board in exchange for work and learning. It felt right, like the property was fulfilling its purpose. One of our first interns was a girl named Rosemary who reminded me of myself at 19. Quiet, hardworking, the type who showed up early and stayed late. She'd grown up in foster care, bounced between homes, never had stability. She attached to the farm immediately, to the routine and the physical work and the clear expectations. At the end of her internship, she asked if she could stay on, work for wages, learn more. We said yes. She moved into the small apartment above the barn that Felix had renovated. She became part of the operation, part of the family, really. One afternoon, I found her sitting in the garden crying. "What's wrong?" I asked. She shook her head. "Nothing's wrong. That's the problem. I've never had nothing wrong before. I don't know what to do with it." I understood exactly what she meant. That feeling when life finally stabilizes and you don't know how to exist without chaos. We talked for a long time about trauma and healing and learning to accept good things, about how sometimes the hardest work is believing you deserve peace. Rosemary stayed 3 years, learned everything we could teach her, then moved on to start her own small farm 2 counties over. We helped her with startup costs, connected her with suppliers, visited regularly. She called every week to ask advice or just to talk. "You gave me a future," she said once. "I gave you a chance," I corrected. "You did the work yourself." That distinction mattered, just like grandmother's inheritance. The opportunity meant nothing without someone willing to earn it. Rosemary had earned everything she'd built. Year 8 brought unexpected news. I was pregnant. We hadn't been trying, but we hadn't been preventing either, just letting life unfold. Felix cried when I told him. Happy tears. Overwhelmed tears. "We're going to raise a child here," he kept saying. "On this land. With these values." It felt monumental. Like everything had been building toward this. Grandmother's test. The inheritance. The years of work. All of it culminating in the chance to raise another generation on this property. To teach them what I'd learned. That promises matter. That showing up counts. That integrity isn't convenient, but it's everything. Our daughter was born in March during a late snowstorm. We named her Dorothy after my friend and Evelyn after my middle name. Dorothy Evelyn, a name that carried weight and legacy. We brought her home to the farmhouse when she was 2 days old, laid her in the cradle that had been grandfather's, then my mother's, then mine. 4 generations connected through wood and promises and land. Mom came to visit when the baby was 3 weeks old. She'd kept her distance during the pregnancy, not wanting to impose, but she held her granddaughter and cried. "She looks like you did," Mom whispered. "Exactly like you." We sat in the living room while the baby slept. Mom looked around at the farmhouse with something like acceptance on her face. "You were right to keep it," she said finally. "I would have sold it, or let it rot. You've made it something beautiful." It was the closest she'd come to admitting I deserved the inheritance more than she had. I chose to hear it as healing, as movement forward. Dorothy grew up on the farm like my mother had, like I should have, learning to walk on the wraparound porch, taking her first steps in the garden. Her first words were common things but also farm things. Chicken before daddy, egg before night-night, dirt before clean. She belonged to the land in a way that felt ancient, inevitable. By the time she was 3, she'd toddle after me during morning chores, wearing miniature overalls Felix had ordered custom. She'd collect eggs with fierce concentration, water plants with a tiny watering can, sit in the garden dirt and examine worms for hours. This is what grandmother wanted, I thought, watching my daughter grow up with soil under her fingernails and responsibility in her daily routine. Legacy isn't money. It's values passed down through lived example. When Dorothy was 4, I took her to visit the cemetery for the first time. We brought flowers from our garden, sat on the grass between the headstones. I told her about her great-grandmother and great-grandfather, about promises and inheritance and showing up. She listened with the serious attention small children sometimes have. Then she said, "We come back lots?" "Every month," I promised. "Just like I always have." "Why?" she asked. "Because I said I would," I told her. "And keeping promises is important." She nodded like this made perfect sense. "Okay, we come every month forever." "Not forever," I said, "but for a very long time." She considered this. "Forever is longer." I laughed despite myself. "You're right. Forever is longer. So we'll come forever." She beamed. It was a promise I intended to keep. And if I couldn't, if something happened to me, I'd make sure she knew why it mattered. Make sure she understood what grandmother had taught me. That integrity is built through small actions repeated over time. That character is who you are when no one's watching. That love is showing up even when it's hard. We expanded the education programs when Dorothy started school, brought in master gardeners to teach classes, partnered with local schools for field trips, hosted workshops on topics beyond farming, financial literacy, small business management, sustainable living. The property became a community resource. Exactly what I'd hoped. Felix ran most of the programming while I managed the daily farm operations and Dorothy. We split childcare and business responsibilities in a way that felt equal, fair. He'd been right that first night on the porch. We were building something that would last. Not just a farm, but a philosophy. A way of approaching life. Show up, do the work, keep your promises. Simple concepts that most people struggled with. We made them the foundation of everything. Year 12 brought my uncle back for an extended visit. His marriage had ended. His kids were grown and distant. His career had stalled. He looked older than his years. Tired. "I'm wondering if I could stay a while?" he asked. "Help out around the farm? Figure out what comes next?" I said yes, without hesitation. He moved into one of the intern apartments and threw himself into physical work. repairs and maintenance and grunt labor. He didn't talk much those first weeks, just worked from dawn to dusk like he was trying to exhaust something inside himself. One evening, we were sitting on the porch after Dorothy had gone to bed. Uncle finally spoke. "I think about that promise every day," he said. "How I broke it so easily. How I convinced myself it didn't matter." "It mattered," I said. "But you can't change the past. You can only choose different actions going forward." He nodded. "I've wasted a lot of years being angry at Mother for testing us, for not just giving us equal shares. But she was right. We needed to prove ourselves worthy. I failed that test, but maybe I can pass a different one." "What test?" I asked. "Being the uncle Dorothy deserves," he said. "Being someone who shows up and follows through, even if it's late, even if I already missed the biggest opportunity." He stayed 6 months, repaired everything that needed repairing, built a new chicken coop 3 times the size of the old one, helped with harvest, taught Dorothy carpentry. When he left, heading to a new job in Oregon, he hugged me tight. "Thank you for letting me try again," he said. "Thank you for showing me it's never too late to become someone reliable." I cried after he drove away. Not sad tears. Something else. Hope, maybe. That people could change. That redemption was possible even after years of disappointment. By year 15, the farm was completely self-sustaining. We made enough from produce sales, education programs, and a small agritourism operation to support ourselves comfortably. The property had tripled in value, but we'd never sell. This was home. This was legacy. This was the place Dorothy would inherit one day if she chose to accept it. I wondered sometimes if I'd test her the way grandmother tested us. Probably not. She was growing up with these values embedded. She already understood that showing up mattered, that promises weren't casual, that integrity was built through consistent action. She'd earned her inheritance through living it daily. No test required, or maybe the test was life itself. The daily choice to do what you said you'd do, to be who you claimed to be, to show up even when it was easier to disappear. Felix and I were sitting on the porch one evening, our usual spot, watching Dorothy play in the yard with the chickens. "How do you think it'll end?" he asked. "What will end?" I said. "This. The farm. Us. Eventually Dorothy will grow up. We'll get old. The cycle continues." I thought about it. Maybe she'll take over the farm. Maybe she'll do something completely different. Either way, we'll have given her the foundation. The rest is up to her. He smiled. "Your grandmother would be proud. You've done exactly what she hoped. Built something meaningful. Passed on something valuable." I wasn't sure about that. Grandmother had given me land and money. I'd tried to give Dorothy something less tangible. Values. Work ethic. The understanding that character matters more than convenience. Whether that was enough remained to be seen. Mom died suddenly when Dorothy was 12. Heart attack? No warning. She was 64. I got the call at 3 a.m. from my brother. "Found her in her apartment," he said. His voice cracked. "She was alone. I'm sorry." We held the funeral in the city where she'd lived. Lots of people came. Her husband's family, her co-workers, friends. They told stories about her kindness and humor, her talent for making people feel seen. I listened and recognized fragments of the mother I'd known before grief and disappointment had changed her, before she'd broken her promise and lost her inheritance and never quite forgiven herself. At the reception, my brother pulled me aside. "She visited the graves," he said, "every month for the last 5 years. After Dorothy was born, she never told you because she was embarrassed. But I went with her sometimes. She'd sit there and talk to them like you used to, apologizing for breaking her promise, explaining why, trying to make peace with it. I cried then, for the mother who'd carried regret for so long, who'd never quite forgiven herself even though I'd forgiven her years ago, who'd kept a new promise in secret because admitting it felt like acknowledging failure. I wish she'd told me," I said. "I wish I'd known." "Would it have changed anything?" my brother asked. "No," I said, "but it would have mattered anyway." We buried Mom in the Oakwood Cemetery, not far from grandmother and grandfather. I'd visit her grave now too, once a month like clockwork, the same schedule I'd kept for 15 years. Some traditions were too important to break. After the funeral, Dorothy asked if we were still going to visit great-grandmother's grave. "Of course," I said. "We promised." She nodded seriously. "And now we'll visit Grandma too, because that's what we do." "Yes," I said. "That's exactly what we do." She understood already. At 12 years old, she'd internalized what it took most people a lifetime to learn, that showing up matters, that promises mean something, that love is action repeated over time. Year 18 brought changes. Felix and I had been running the farm for nearly 2 decades. We were tired, not unhappy, but worn, ready for something to shift. We hired a full-time manager to handle daily operations, promoted Rosemary's protege to run the education programs, stepped back slightly from the grinding routine. It felt strange at first. The farm had been everything for so long, but also liberating. We had time to travel, to pursue projects we'd postponed, to just exist without every moment being scheduled around planting and harvest and livestock. Dorothy was 15 and pushing for independence like teenagers do. She'd started talking about college, about seeing the world beyond Vermont, about doing something different with her life. It scared me more than I wanted to admit. Not that she'd leave, but that she'd think the farm wasn't enough, that everything we'd built here was somehow inadequate. She caught me in this spiral one afternoon. "You think I don't appreciate this place," she said. "I do. I just want to make sure I choose it rather than defaulting to it." That made sense. Uncomfortable sense, but sense nonetheless. Grandmother had given me the farm as recognition of character, but Dorothy needed to discover her own character, build her own integrity. That couldn't happen if she simply inherited everything without earning it. We talked late into the night about promises and inheritance and legacy, about how she'd grown up with advantages I'd never had. Security, stability, parents who showed up. I don't want to take any of this for granted, she said. The way your mother did, the way your uncle did. I want to prove I deserve it. You don't have to prove anything, I said. But if you need to, I understand. She left for college 3 years later. State school about 4 hours away, close enough to visit but far enough to be independent. She studied environmental science and sustainable agriculture, came home for breaks in summer, worked the farm during those visits like she'd never left, but she was building her own life, her own identity. That's what we'd raised her to do. Felix and I adjusted to empty nest syndrome by throwing ourselves into community work, served on local boards, volunteered, hosted more events at the farm, opened the property for weddings and corporate retreats, used the income to fund scholarships for young farmers. We were building something that would outlast us. That felt important, necessary even. Dorothy graduated at 22 and surprised us by asking to come home, not permanently, but for a few years to learn the business side of the farm before deciding her next steps. We said yes. She moved back into her childhood room and became a full partner in operations, brought fresh ideas and energy, updated our systems, expanded our online presence, connected with a younger generation of farmers through social media. She was good at it, natural, like she'd inherited not just the land but the drive to make it meaningful. One afternoon, she asked about grandmother's test, about the promise and the cemetery visits and the inheritance. Do you think it was fair? She asked. What grandmother did, making everyone compete. I thought about it. Fair isn't the right word, I said. But it was effective. She made sure the property went to someone who'd care for it properly. Dorothy nodded. Would you do the same to me? I don't think I'd need to, I said. You've already proven yourself by coming back, by choosing this life even after seeing other options. She smiled. Good. Because I'd pass any test, but I'd rather not be tested. Fair enough, I said. 25 years after Patricia knocked on my door, I was standing in the cemetery talking to 3 generations of graves. Grandfather, grandmother, mom. Dorothy was beside me. My Dorothy. No longer a child, but a woman of 24 who ran half the farm operations. We'd made this a regular thing, monthly visits together, continuing the tradition I'd started decades ago. You really came every month for 3 years before the inheritance? Dorothy asked. Every single month, I confirmed. Even when you were sick, even in blizzards, even when everyone thought you were crazy. Especially then, I said. She was quiet for a moment. That's wild. To keep a promise when no one's watching, when there's no reward, when everyone else has given up. That's character, I said. That's what grandmother was testing. Whether we had character or just good intentions. Dorothy touched grandmother's headstone gently. I think I understand now why she did it. Why she couldn't just give everyone equal shares. Because we teach people how to treat things by watching how they treat their commitments. If you break promises when they're inconvenient, you'll break anything when it suits you. Exactly, I said. She got it. Really got it. In a way Mom never had. In a way Uncle struggled to even after years of work. The lesson had landed. Legacy secured. We walked back to the car in comfortable silence. The farm waited for us. 40 acres of land that had shaped my entire adult life. That would shape Dorothy's too if she chose. But either way, she had the foundation, the values. The understanding that promises matter and showing up counts and integrity is built through small actions repeated over time. That was grandmother's real gift. Not the land or the money, but the lesson embedded in how she distributed it. Some things have to be earned. Some things require proof. Some things can't be faked or rushed or shortcut. They can only be built through consistent action over years, through keeping your word when no one's watching, through being exactly who you claim to be even when it costs you something. That's what I learned sitting by a grave for 3 years. That's what Dorothy learned growing up on this farm. That's what we'd pass on to whoever came next. Not through tests or conditions, but through lived example. By showing up, by doing what we said we'd do, by keeping our promises even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. That's what grandmother wanted. That's what she got. That's what continues 25 years later. A legacy not of land but of integrity, not of wealth but of character, not of inheritance but of values earned through the hardest work there is, becoming someone reliable, someone trustworthy, someone who keeps their promises. That's worth more than 40 acres in Vermont. That's worth everything.